All right, so this is going to be a video that I probably should have made a long time ago. A recurring theme on this channel is how I'm not a huge fan of powerlifting the big three, and I think it's actually counterproductive when training for hypertrophy. The video today is going to be about the big three and how I would change it. When you look at the big three, and you'll notice if you've been following the channel for a while, it's not so much the technical aspects of the lifts, it's the mindset and the approach that we take towards those lifts. Being able to break past and break beyond that specific mindset is what's going to allow you to actually reap certain benefits of the big three, and even better, in my opinion, certain variations of it. So I am going to go through my philosophy, and then at the end I have a few variations that I think would be best for you. And as much as I would want to just tell you the variations, it doesn't make much sense just to change variations if you don't understand why you're doing it and the purpose behind it. So let's dive into the philosophy. So I hate the big three. Now what? The big three are the what we call the base builders. Everybody has to do the big three, especially beginners. That's what builds your base. Let's dive into that. The big three are often referred to as the base builders, and they get thrown at us like they're the gods of lifts. While there's nothing wrong with these lifts necessarily, I do think we need to take advantage of some better alternatives, and I think we need to redefine what our base is when it comes to bodybuilding. And I'll touch more on that in a minute, but one thing that is kind of important is the big three mindset. The big three, let's face it, they do come with pressure. Let's be real, there is a pressure that comes with these lifts. Lots of programs, especially the ones for beginners, revolve around getting these three lifts up as much as you can and as quickly as possible. When you combine this pressure from the program itself with the perceived pressure from the lifting culture, this incentivizes a shift in mindset from hypertrophy-oriented to strength-oriented. And that's one of the biggest issues with a lot of lifters and beginners in particular. You take a look at their program, and it's all revolved around the big three. And I'll touch more on this later, why that's an issue. But everything in the program and everything about their mindset is revolved around getting these lifts up. They're putting all their eggs in one basket, and that basket probably won't get them the results that they're looking for if you're training for hypertrophy. When your program is trying to have you rush from one weight to the next, and especially if you're a new lifter that hasn't developed confidence in yourself and confidence in training and programming, the last thing you want to do is let yourself down by progressing a little bit slower, which is generally going to be better for hypertrophy anyways. So these programs, they incentivize you to progress as fast as you possibly can at the expense of more important fundamentals of your training. The way we look at it is we're so caught up in these strength numbers from the program, and there's like a social aspect to it too. We get shoved down our throats. The big three, you see Larry Wheels and all these guys hitting like 2,000 plus totals, repping out 225 on bench, and we go to the gym to get big. I'm talking about the people training for hypertrophy. That's why you're on this channel. It's called Basement Bodybuilding, obviously. But what happens is we see these numbers, and when the gym is supposed to be this place for us to go do whatever we need to do to get big and get muscular, which is obviously our goal, we now get distracted, and we kind of feel bad about ourselves for not having these big impressive numbers that get all the clicks and views on Instagram and TikTok and whatever. So you almost get distracted by these shiny objects in a place that's supposed to be supporting your innate goals. And I do think that's kind of an issue. And as for the issues that this shift in mindset towards strength actually gives to you, these are some of the problems. I think technique is going to be the biggest one, and I think putting all your eggs in one basket is another issue. So you look at technique. When you're doing the big three, it's easy to be strength oriented because, like I said, your program incentivizes it, the culture and the social aspect incentivizes it, and for some reason you want these big numbers because you don't have that confidence in yourself yet in your technique. So when your technique slowly goes to shit, so you can keep upping your numbers to prove your strength for whatever reason, now you're getting less stimulation from your sets. Instead of doing a full range of motion squat or bench, now you're starting to use a huge arch, or you're switching to low bar and doing half reps just to feel a little bit better about your strength numbers, which is defeating the purpose of doing the set in the first place. Now we've been completely distracted by the strength numbers, and we're sacrificing hypertrophy fundamentals that will actually give you the results you want in the first place. And this will all come full circle at the end of the video too. So technique and mindset are both just getting kind of put in a blender and twisted around right now. And that will not lead you down the right path. Trust me, I speak from experience with this stuff. So when I first started lifting, I was so hypertrophy oriented, and my training and my mindset reflected that. I made incredible gains. I swapped over to a strength oriented mindset. I got so distracted by all these big numbers that people were doing, and I kept getting told that this was the best. Powerlifting, power building is the best for hypertrophy because of strength standards. And once you hit this bench or once you hit this squat, you'll be this size. And ultimately, that's just a fallacy because I could leverage and maximize my strength output, but that comes at the expense of the complete package in putting my eggs into the entire program. So to get back to that base portion, and this is where it all starts to tie together a little bit, we're constantly told that beginners, you build your base from doing squat, bench, deadlift. Everybody else, this is the meat and potatoes. This is what drives progression. This is what drives muscle growth. And there are a couple issues with this. I think we're viewing the lifts as the cornerstone and the foundation of our program, when in reality it should be muscle groups, and then the lifts would come secondary to make sure we're training those muscle groups properly. Let's dive into this one. A bodybuilder's base, in my opinion, is evenly spread out muscle mass with a little bit of an emphasis on prioritized muscles so you can get the physique that you're going after. I recommend picking a lift based on how well it trains the target muscle. This will allow you to optimize your technique or variation selection to train that specific muscle. So we look at these certain lifts and we're told we have to do squat, bench, deadlift. And we're doing that because it's a lift that people are telling us to do. But when you look at the hypertrophic response from certain lifts, there's generally one target muscle from each lift that grows the most. That's the primary target of each lift, the prime moving muscle. And when you can view it like that, and say, well, why am I squatting? What muscles am I trying to grow from squatting? And any bodybuilder focused on building their best physique will pick one muscle group that lift is going to target. You don't want to just bank on getting, if you are after getting the most you can out of the least movements, that's just minimalism. And if you're a minimalist, you're probably not in this to be the best or to build your best physique. So this doesn't necessarily apply to you. And I think that's perfect evidence right there. But for most of the people that are on this channel, a bodybuilding channel, you want to pick a lift for a given muscle group. So when I pick squats, I'm going to make them as quad biased as I possibly can because I have other muscles, or I have other lifts in other days targeting muscles that the squats kind of hit but don't really target enough to stimulate growth. So for me, that's an easy one. I'll pick a squat variation and use a certain technique that biases my quads as much as I possibly can. So now it's not the squat that I'm doing, it's a movement that biases my quads as much as I can. And now I can view the squat correctly and I can execute it correctly too. My incentive isn't a strength standard. My incentive isn't to get a certain total or a certain 1 rep max or even 5 rep max for that matter on squats. My goal is to stimulate the quads as much as I possibly can. So this is the mindset shift from a powerlifter strength-centered big three mindset to a hypertrophy mindset. And this is what you want when you're training for bodybuilding. And it's not an easy shift. And I would recommend ditching the big three entirely. And I would say at least for a couple months, go to variations that are a little bit more different. So like if you're doing a low bar squat and just going straight to parallel and just doing a regular powerlifter style squat, try something entirely different that you have no attachment to. Try like a front squat or a leg press or a hack squat or something like that. And it's the same concept for something like bench. And I'm just going to talk about myself a little bit here. When I was transitioning from a regular powerlifting style bench, just chasing numbers, to a more bodybuilding style bench, it's not easy. Like at first I tried to go more hypertrophy style. Like I was doing, 290 for a 5x5 or something. And then for me to go to like a 240 for like a few sets of 6 with perfect technique, that's just boring. Like it's going to bore you. And it's not boring because training for hypertrophy is boring. It's definitely, there's an art and there's a mindset to it. I fully believe that, and I've experienced that. But you're gonna be so close to what you used to be that it's still gonna fuck with your ego. Let's just be real. It's gonna mess with your head. It's gonna mess with your ego, and you're gonna slowly just creep back into those old habits. And it took a big transition for me. Like, I was training at a commercial gym, doing bench press and whatnot, and then whatever happened to the whole don't know if I can say that word, the shutdown that happened in 2020. And then I got the home gym, and now I just lift in my shack, and it's much easier because I don't even have like a regular bench press. I can just use something like this machine press, or I can do weighted dips, and it's just a completely different environment. It's all new lifts, and I'm coming at it from a brand new mindset, and it's honestly just helped me a ton. So what I'd say for you is, instead of going from like a regular powerlifting style bench to like a little bit less arch and a little bit slower controlled negatives, do something completely different. Try like weighted dips, or try a machine press, something that your ego has no attachment to, and that you can start fresh on a fresh slate, just building up a good mind muscle connection. Build technique. Technique is going to be the most important thing. Learn proximity to failure and target that muscle the best you can through that lift. That's going to help you so much in terms of building muscle. And once you stick with that for a few months, and you take your measurements, you take progress photos, do your weigh-ins, and stick to a plan with your nutrition, you're going to relearn bodybuilding, and it's going to be a brand new experience all over again. And it's what you initially got in here for. And the purpose of you lifting has now come back to you. And I understand a lot of that is just me talking about my experience, but there's no way I'm the only one that's gone through that. There's just no way. So let's build off of this a little bit. When it comes to the big three will build up certain muscle groups. And this is where we're going to start to tie into the variations that you guys have been waiting for. The big three will build up, say, your lower back, your glutes, hamstrings, and chest, and potentially some quads if you're built for squats and you can grow your quads through them. And this is the shift from looking at a lift as a lift for a lift as to target one specific muscle group. And this is part of my training philosophy. How many of you guys would be satisfied if your training revolved around, let's take the lifts out of the equation, let's just take a look at the muscles that the lifts grow. How many of you guys, low back, glutes, hamstrings, chest, and potentially quads, how many of you guys have that as your top tier, like, primary goal muscles to grow? Seriously, how many of you guys have that? When you're training for bodybuilding, who wants to be primarily developed in those areas? Not many of you. That's going to be pretty rare. So now when we're looking at it in terms of muscle groups, now we start to say, all right, well, maybe, just maybe, an overhead tricep extension is a little bit more meat and potatoes than something like an RDL. And as big in how great an RDL is for packing on muscle, where the muscle goes might not be as high of a priority. So that's a logical reason why maybe you should take your overhead tricep extensions and your JM presses more seriously than an RDL. And I hate to do like that whole lift discrimination thing, as funny as that sounds. I like to treat all lifts equally, but let's be real here. Prioritize the lifts that target the muscles you're trying to grow, because this isn't about your strength. This isn't about what you do in the gym. This is how you look outside of the gym. This is about your physique, and it's about bodybuilding, and that's what this stuff is. And ironically, to tie this all together again, I always build more strength when I focus on building muscle. And I was plateauing constantly when I put all my eggs in one basket of the big three. When I was chasing strength, yeah, of course, the first couple months I was just skyrocketing up because I had that buffer room that I could still get through with my technique and whatnot. But after that, it's like it just constant plateaus, and that doesn't grow much muscle. And when I focused on just building muscle, my strength was going up slowly but surely, slowly over time. I didn't even really have to check my strength or whatever. It would just keep going up. And the reason for that is because I kept getting bigger. And when a muscle gets bigger, it gets a little bit stronger. It's going to be nothing crazy. It's not going to turn you into a power lifter. But you'll notice that if you're building muscle over time, the weights that you're using are just going to start to feel a little bit lighter. You're going to get a little bit more reps. And that's why I like to use something like the rep goal system as a very passive form of progression, because it's like you can just focus on what's in front of you. And then eventually it's like you have a rep goal and you're like, all right, well, once I get good enough at curling the 35s, if they truly are light and if I truly have built muscle from the sets and the protocols that I'm using, I'm going to be able to do more than 30 or 35 reps across 3 sets. And then eventually you'll just check your training log and be like, well, shit, I passed that. Let me go up and add 5 pounds to this lift. And you got stronger, not because you're chasing a number, but because you're chasing hard sets close to failure with the best technique that's being constantly refined. And that's what truly builds strength that is necessary for hypertrophy. It's very passive. It's a side effect is the way that I see it. And it is kind of the other way around with like a powerlifting strength oriented style training. The hypertrophy would be the side effect if you're lucky. And that why would you put all your eggs in one basket of something that's not necessarily guaranteed? That's kind of the way I see it. So let's get to the point you guys have all been waiting for. Let's just get to it. So the alternatives for the big 3, these are my variations. And I'm giving you guys a few. I'm giving you guys options. I'd say before we get into this, if you're very attached to a certain lift of the big 3, pick the least close cousin of it. So pick something that isn't quite related. Pick like the second cousin 3 times removed or something. So it's like marriage related, but not that similar. So for the squat, I squat for my quads. So let's take a look at some knee flexions that are going to target the quads very well. Instead of a high bar squat to parallel, some people can get away with that for sure. I'm not saying it's a terrible lift, but it didn't really work for me, and there's a lot of people it doesn't work for. Variations that would likely be better for most people: the Platz squat, that's going to be a great lift. I'd highly recommend it. A hack squat, very similar, just kind of on a machine, and obviously it's holds you a little bit more upright, so it is going to isolate the quads a little bit more. A low stance leg press, which is going to be a little bit more glutes in there, but still a ton of quads. And then a safety squat bar, squat that style. That's going to be kind of similar to a front squat. And humans are very good at torture, so we did come up with a safety squat bar Platz squat. So if you're into stuff like that, that will murder your quads and get them so jacked. So I highly recommend you give that a try if you have an SSB and some type of squat wedge or plates to stand on. That's a great lift. For bench press, I'm benching for my chest. If you're benching for your triceps, you probably aren't viewing the bench press in the best way. The bench press should be used for your chest, so let's find ways to optimize chest growth from that. The first one I'd say is a plate-loaded machine press. I'm sitting on one right now. These are great because you can get an insane range of motion. The handles are not attached, and the handles are also not dumbbells that get in the way once they get too big. So a machine is great. You can get the best range of motion you possibly can. And let's be real, like there's something to dumbbell flies. There's something to that crazy stretch on your pecs that get them to grow. As much as I think compound lifts and presses will do most of what you need for your chest to grow, I don't think you're maximizing it without some type of good stretch. And I'm not saying it has to be through a fly, but you can get that same stretch, or a similar one at least, through a machine or through dumbbells. So any type of like hammer strength plate loaded machine press, these are excellent for the chest. The next one I've got for you is a low incline dumbbell press. And this is kind of similar to the machine press because you can also get a really good stretch, but you're also getting an incline to work the upper chest a little bit more. I typically recommend about 30 degrees on the incline. That seems to be best. It's kind of that happy medium where it's not so steep that you're working a lot of front delts, but it's also steep enough to be a variation from a flat press. So that's a great lift. I know a lot of you guys are doing incline dumbbell press anyways, but don't make it an accessory lift. Make that your meat and potatoes, and get rid of the term accessory lift. There's no accessories when you're training for hypertrophy. Everything's kind of a main lift. The lift that you do last should be trained just as hard as the lift that you do first in that given session. They're all important. If you start slacking, your physique is also going to reflect that. The last one I have here is going to be dips. Dips are fun. It's easy to keep them strict, and they also get a great stretch. One cue that I like to use for these is just to flare your elbows out a tiny little bit. That will give you a little bit more mobility when it comes to your shoulders and your front delt area, so you can go a little bit lower and transfer most of the tension onto your pecs. You're not limited by the stretch of your front delts. So when you're back here, your front delt stretching a ton. If you just flare it out, there's a little bit less there. Don't do anything crazy, don't do anything stupid, but just a tiny little bit, 10, 15 degrees out, that should do the trick. And last but not least, when it comes to deadlift, this is going to be a hamstring and a little bit of glute focused lift. That's why I'm doing this lift. The first variation I have is going to be a power shrug. So people deadlift primarily for traps, spinal erectors, hamstrings, glutes, and kind of like forearms too. Most people just do it to get stronger and hope it packs on some mass. That does go somewhat against my training philosophy. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the deadlift, but I do think banking on the deadlift packing on all that mass for you is taking a risk that probably isn't worth taking. It is a gamble, and it's a gamble that I've lost in the past. So this is my advice from someone that failed training this way to you that still has the potential to turn that around sooner than later. A power shrug is going to be the most direct, and I would argue it's the best lift that it out there for your traps. You want to find that happy medium between going heavy enough that you need to use leg drive to actually shrug the weight up, but not so heavy that you can't really get the weight up and you're not even getting a full range of motion. You want it's kind of funky, and it will take a little bit of time to find the best weight for you, but I have an entire tutorial. I posted it about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's just called How to Power Shrug. If you haven't seen that, please go watch it. It's completely in depth, technique, mistakes, my entire philosophy behind it, everything. You'd like it. Next one I've got is RDLs. This is going to be the best it gets when it comes to directly targeting your glutes and hamstrings. It's like it's similar to a conventional deadlift, but instead of just kind of dispersing all of that tension throughout your entire posterior, it all gets pushed into your hamstrings and glutes. It's so much more direct, and you can use less weight too. So when you're using less weight, that means less rest time between sets. That means easier on the systemic fatigue, so you don't have to worry about managing your fatigue as much as you would with a deadlift, and it also won't kill the rest of your workout. Like when I was strong and I was deadlifting, the rest of the workout sucked. Like, let's just be real here. When you're that strong and you're pushing that much weight, or pulling that much weight, whatever, if you're gonna correct me, but it kills the rest of your workout. With something like an RDL, just as Alex Leonidas says, you get more out of less weight, and that lets you get the volume in to train your entire body too. That's my reasoning behind that one. The last one I got for you guys is a deficit deadlift. This is something I haven't touched in a long time, but it's very similar to RDLs. You get more out of less weight, and it's just kind of a similar variation. You'll get a similar stretch. You don't have to do it stiff-legged, but it's a good range of motion. You get more out of less weight. It's just an all-around solid lift. So that's it for the video today, guys. Hope you enjoyed. I will see you within 2, 3, 4 days. We'll see.